The conference room buzzed with the comfortable hum of corporate celebration. Crystal glasses clinked under warm lighting as the marketing department gathered for their quarterly achievement party. David stood near the refreshment table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching his wife Emma navigate the crowd with practiced ease. She'd worked at Cornerstone Media for 6 years, climbing from junior account manager to senior strategist, a journey he'd witnessed through late-night presentations and weekend proposal drafts. Everyone, a moment of your attention. The voice cut through the chatter like a blade. Trevor Hammond stood at the center of the room, his expensive suit jacket draped over one arm, wine glass raised high. Trevor was the company's star sales director, charismatic, aggressive, and perpetually positioned just on the right side of controversial. The room quieted. David noticed Emma's expression shift subtly, a tension appearing at the corners of her smile. "I want to propose a toast," Trevor announced, his voice carrying that particular pitch of someone who believes their words are pearls of wisdom. "To our incredible team. To the late nights, the won accounts, the victories we've earned." He paused, his eyes scanning the room with theatrical timing. "And let's be honest, to the patient spouses who tolerate our absence. Especially to the men who pay the bills while their wives play career woman. Here's to the checkbook warriors." Laughter rippled through portions of the crowd, uncomfortable, uncertain laughter that people produce when they're not quite sure if they should be amused but don't want to appear humorless. Trevor's gaze landed on David, a smirk playing at his lips. Several colleagues glanced between them. David felt Emma stiffen beside him. Her hand found his arm, fingers pressing gently, a silent apology, a check-in, a question. He squeezed back once, a brief acknowledgement, but said nothing. His face remained neutral, pleasant even, as he took a small sip of water. "Come on, David, you can appreciate the humor," Trevor pressed, emboldened by the scattered chuckles. "We all know Emma's the breadwinner in your household, right? Nothing wrong with a kept man in this modern age." The comment wasn't entirely wrong on the surface. Emma did earn more than David's salary as a technical writer for an educational nonprofit. But the implication, the mocking tone, the public humiliation disguised as jest, was designed to diminish. David smiled slightly, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "Emma's success speaks for itself," he said quietly, then turned to refresh his drink, effectively ending the interaction without confrontation. Trevor, denied the reaction he'd sought, shrugged and moved on to other targets. The party continued, but Emma's colleagues, the observant ones, noticed the exchange. They noticed Trevor's casual cruelty. They noticed David's dignified restraint. And they noticed the slight flush of shame on Trevor's face when the joke landed flatter than he'd intended. Later that evening, in the car heading home, Emma broke the silence. "I'm sorry about Trevor. He's always been an arrogant jerk, but that was beyond inappropriate." "Don't apologize for him," David said, eyes on the road. "You didn't say it. I should have shut him down. Right there. In front of everyone. Would that have helped?" Emma considered this. Probably would have made it worse. Given him ammunition about can't take a joke or oversensitive nonsense. David nodded. People like Trevor thrive on reactions. They're performers who need an audience and resistance to feel powerful. Denying them the show is sometimes the strongest response. What Emma didn't see was David's hand tightening on the steering wheel, the muscle working in his jaw. What she didn't know was that her husband had spent years in investigative research before switching to technical writing, that his mind naturally catalogued inconsistencies, patterns, anomalies. What she couldn't have guessed was that Trevor's performance that evening had done something unexpected. It had made David truly see Trevor for the first time. And in seeing him, David had noticed something interesting. The expensive watch that didn't match Trevor's salary level, the casual mention of a client dinner in the same breath as an Aston Martin rental, the familiar way Trevor had touched the shoulder of Natalie, the new intern, earlier in the evening. Small things. Potentially nothing. But David's experience had taught him that nothing was often something waiting to be understood.
Let's continue because this is where patience becomes power. I said nothing that night. I could not confront anyone. I just watched, listened, and remembered. Over time, truth exposed itself, messages, behaviors, lies. And when it did, it didn't need revenge. Accountability did the job for me. Disrespect always feels brave until it has consequences. Let's move to the story.
The weeks following the party settled into routine, but David found his attention caught by fragments of Emma's work conversations. It wasn't intentional eavesdropping, they shared an apartment, and Emma often processed her day aloud while making dinner or folding laundry. But where he'd previously let the corporate drama wash over him like background noise, now he listened. Trevor claimed the Patterson account again. Emma mentioned one Tuesday evening, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. That's the third time this quarter he's taken credit for Rachel's groundwork. She brings in the client, does the needs analysis, builds the relationship, then Trevor swoops in for the final pitch and his name goes on the contract. David looked up from his laptop. Does Rachel report it? To who? Trevor's numbers are incredible. Management loves him. And Rachel's too junior to make waves without risking her position. Emma scraped the vegetables into a pan. It's just how things work there. The people with the biggest personalities get the recognition. But David's mind was already working. 3 times in one quarter wasn't coincidence. It was pattern. It suggested systematic behavior, a methodology. He thought about the expensive watch again, the luxury lifestyle Trevor projected. Sales directors at Cornerstone made good money, certainly, but Trevor's spending suggested something beyond salary. Over the following weeks, David paid closer attention to the names Emma dropped. Natalie, the intern, whose mentorship sessions with Trevor happened at odd hours. Brian, the junior analyst, who'd apparently been reassigned after questioning some of Trevor's expense reports. Linda from accounting, who'd looked visibly uncomfortable when Trevor made a joke about her divorce at a team lunch. David didn't investigate. Not actively. He simply remembered. Filed away. Connected. His opportunity came unexpectedly. Emma's company newsletter arrived in their shared email. She'd added him to the distribution list months ago so he could keep track of her achievements. Usually, David skimmed it briefly. This time, he read it thoroughly. There, buried in the announcement section, congratulations to Trevor Hammond for securing the Waverley Industries contract, our largest account this year. Trevor's innovative approach and client relations excellence continue to set the standard for our sales division. David remembered this one. Emma had mentioned Waverley Industries 2 months ago. Specifically, how Rachel had spent weeks researching their needs, identifying decision-makers, building proposals. Rachel, who wasn't mentioned in the announcement. That evening, David made a decision. He opened his laptop and began a simple document. No investigation, no confrontation, just documentation. He titled it Timeline and began entering dates and details from Emma's conversations, public company announcements, anything in the public record. March 15th, Trevor claims Patterson account, Rachel's development work. March 22nd, Waverley Industries announcement, Rachel's research. April 3rd, Brian transferred to different department after expense report inquiry. April 10th, company party incident. He wasn't building a case. He was simply organizing information that already existed, creating a reference point for patterns that might mean nothing or might mean everything. Meanwhile, at Cornerstone Media, fault lines were beginning to show. Natalie, the intern, had grown noticeably quieter over recent weeks. She avoided Trevor's mentorship sessions and requested a different supervisor, a request that was denied. Rachel had submitted a formal complaint about credit attribution and had been told that collaboration means shared success and that she was not being a team player. Linda from accounting, however, had begun her own quiet documentation. She'd noticed discrepancies in Trevor's expense reports, not large enough to trigger automatic audits, but consistent enough to suggest careful manipulation. A dinner for 4 claimed as client entertainment that matched the date of Trevor's anniversary dinner on social media. Mileage reimbursements for trips that corresponded with personal vacations. Equipment purchases that never appeared in inventory. Individually, each item was minor, potentially explainable. Collectively, they suggested something else entirely. Linda had worked in corporate accounting for 15 years. She knew the difference between mistakes and methodology. She also knew that Trevor had powerful advocates in management, that his sales numbers protected him like armor, that speaking up could cost her the job she needed to support her children. So she did what cautious people do in dangerous situations. She made copies. Quietly, methodically, she created a personal file of documentation. Not for action, not yet. But for insurance, for truth, for the possibility that someday someone might ask the right questions. David didn't know about Linda's files. Linda didn't know about David's timeline. But they were doing the same thing, independently, driven by the same instinct. That truth, properly documented, has a weight of its own. That sometimes the most powerful action is simply refusing to let reality be rewritten by charisma and confidence. Emma noticed David's thoughtfulness during this period. "You're quiet lately," she observed one evening. "Still thinking about Trevor's stupid comment?" "No," David said honestly. He wasn't thinking about the insult. He was thinking about patterns, systems, the way institutional dysfunction protects itself by making individual victims feel isolated and powerless. "I'm thinking about how structures work. How they protect some people and expose others." Emma kissed his forehead. "Too philosophical for a Wednesday night. Come watch something mindless with me." He did, but part of his mind remained active, cataloging, connecting, waiting. Because David understood something that Trevor didn't. Arrogance creates evidence. The more invulnerable someone feels, the less carefully they cover their tracks. And eventually, the weight of accumulated truth becomes too heavy for charm to support. The first crack appeared not with drama but with bureaucracy. Cornerstone Media's parent corporation announced a routine compliance audit, standard procedure following their acquisition of two smaller firms. The memo emphasized that this was precautionary, that everyone should continue normal operations while providing requested documentation. For most employees, it meant nothing. For Trevor Hammond, it meant exposure. David learned about it through Emma's frustrated venting. "The timing couldn't be worse," she complained, sorting through files at their dining table. "This audit is demanding 7 years of contract histories, expense documentation, client communication records. I've got the Riverside proposal due Friday and now I'm buried in paperwork from 2019. Will Trevor have to provide documentation too?" David asked, the question casual, curious. Everyone in sales and accounts does. Trevor's probably panicking more than anyone. You know how disorganized his records are. He's always claimed his system works because he delivers results. Emma paused, frowning slightly. "Actually, that's weird. He's been unusually quiet the last few days. Usually he's the first person to complain about corporate bureaucracy." What Emma didn't know was that Trevor had spent the past 72 hours in quiet desperation. The audit request had been specific: reconcile all expense reports with supporting documentation, provide client communication trails for all claimed accounts, submit equipment and resource allocation records. Simple requirements for someone with nothing to hide. Trevor had plenty to hide. The dinner expenses that were actually personal celebrations. The hotel stays claimed as client meetings that coincided with weekend getaways. The mileage reimbursements for trips that never happened. The commission credits for accounts he'd taken from other team members. None of it obvious enough to trigger immediate flags, all of it impossible to properly document when scrutinized closely. He'd attempted to reconstruct false documentation, but 7 years was too much territory to cover. He'd considered claiming records were lost, but the parent corporation had made clear that incomplete compliance would result in deeper investigation. He was trapped by the weight of his own accumulated deception. Linda from accounting noticed Trevor's anxiety during this period. She saw him requesting access to archived files, saw him staying late to review old expense reports, saw the strain in his usually confident demeanor. And she made a decision. She requested a private meeting with the audit team. "I want to be clear," she told the lead auditor, a severe woman named Patricia who treated numbers like sacred text. "I'm not making accusations. I'm providing information that I believe deserves scrutiny. If there are reasonable explanations, that's fine. But there are patterns in certain expense reports that concern me professionally." Patricia listened as Linda outlined the discrepancies she'd documented. The consistent pattern of expense inflation. The suspicious timing of certain claims. The equipment purchases that had never appeared in inventory tracking. Linda provided her personal documentation, copies of reports, spreadsheets showing patterns, side-by-side comparisons of claims versus verifiable events. Why didn't you report this earlier? Patricia asked. Because individually, each instance seemed minor. Because the person involved has powerful advocates. Because I've seen what happens to people who challenge successful employees. Linda met Patricia's gaze steadily. But an official audit creates opportunity for truth without requiring individual courage. I'm simply providing information you would have eventually discovered anyway. Patricia nodded slowly. We'll need to expand our review. This will take time. Meanwhile, Natalie finally broke her silence. The intern had endured months of inappropriate comments, unwanted touching disguised as mentorship, pressure to attend after-hours networking events that felt increasingly predatory. She'd kept quiet because she needed the internship credit, because Trevor had made clear that her evaluation would suffer if she couldn't handle professional relationships, because every complaint pathway seemed to lead through people who admired Trevor's results. The audit created distance. Trevor was too distracted, too focused on his own crisis, to maintain his usual pressure. In that breathing room, Natalie found courage. She approached HR not with accusations but with questions. What are the actual boundaries for supervisor-intern interactions? What constitutes appropriate mentorship? Can I request documentation of my actual work performance separate from subjective evaluations? The HR representative, a thoughtful woman named Diane who'd been quietly troubled by whispers about Trevor for months, recognized the careful phrasing. Are you experiencing something that concerns you? I'm trying to understand whether my experiences are normal or whether I should be concerned. It was enough. Diane opened a file, began asking careful questions, creating official documentation. Not an accusation, an inquiry. But in corporate structures, inquiries create paper trails, and paper trails create accountability. David remained unaware of these specific developments, but he noticed Emma's changing tone when she discussed work. Less frustration with general corporate dysfunction, more specific concerns about Trevor. Something's happening, Emma told him one evening. I don't know exactly what, but Trevor's been called into multiple closed-door meetings. Rachel mentioned that the audit team asked her detailed questions about account development for contracts Trevor claimed. And Natalie requested a different supervisor, and this time they approved it. How do you feel about that? David asked. Emma was quiet for a moment. Relieved, I think. There's always been something off about Trevor, the way he operates, the way he treats people, especially women. But his numbers protected him. If the audit is actually examining how those numbers were achieved. She trailed off, then looked at David. You never responded to his insult at the party. You just went quiet. Because responding would have made it about me and him. But it was never about me. It was about who he is, someone who diminishes others to feel powerful. People like that eventually reveal themselves. It just takes time and the right circumstances. Emma leaned against him. You're more patient than I am. Not patient. Just aware that some fights win themselves if you don't get in the way. What David didn't say was that patience wasn't passive. He'd continued his timeline, adding details from Emma's conversations, connecting patterns. He'd never shared it with anyone, never acted on it. But he'd maintained the record, understanding that truth documented is truth preserved, and preserved truth eventually finds its moment. That moment was approaching faster than anyone realized. The audit report arrived on a Tuesday morning. Patricia delivered it personally to Cornerstone Media's executive leadership, and within hours, the implications rippled through the company like seismic waves. Trevor Hammond's documented expense fraud totaled $47,000 over 4 years. Not enough to bankrupt the company, but substantial enough to constitute felony theft. The commission misappropriation was more complex. 6 major accounts where Trevor had claimed primary credit and corresponding commission bonuses for work primarily performed by other team members, particularly Rachel. The value of those stolen commissions exceeded $180,000. But numbers alone didn't capture the full scope. The audit had uncovered a systematic pattern of behavior, taking credit for others' work, manipulating documentation to support false narratives, using position and personality to deflect scrutiny. Combined with Natalie's formal HR complaint about harassment and intimidation, and supporting statements from 3 other employees who came forward once they realized they weren't alone, the picture was damning. The executives faced a crisis that went beyond one employee's misconduct. They had to answer why their systems had failed to catch these patterns earlier, why multiple complaints had been dismissed or minimized, why charisma and sales numbers had been allowed to override accountability. Trevor was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. His access was revoked, his office sealed, his cases transferred. The fall from corporate star to liability happened in a single morning. Emma came home that evening looking shaken. It's all anyone's talking about. Trevor's gone. Completely gone. They're saying fraud, harassment, possibly criminal charges. Rachel is being promoted to senior sales director and getting retroactive commissions for the accounts Trevor stole from her. It's like watching someone's entire career implode in real time. David listened quietly, nodding at appropriate moments. The crazy thing is, Emma continued, people are saying they always suspected something was off, but nobody wanted to be the one to challenge him. He had this armor of confidence and results, and questioning him felt like career suicide. She paused, looking at David carefully. You knew, didn't you? That night at the party, when he mocked you, you saw something. I saw someone who believed he was untouchable. People who believe that tend to take increasingly careless risks. David met her eyes. I didn't know specifics. I just recognized the pattern of someone who'd been getting away with things for so long that they'd stopped being careful about covering tracks. Did you do anything? Report anything? No. I didn't have anything to report, just observations and intuition. What I did do was remember. I kept a timeline of things you mentioned, public information, dates and patterns. Not for any specific purpose, just as a reference. A way of maintaining clarity about what actually happened versus what Trevor's version claimed happened. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Can I see it? David retrieved his laptop and opened the document. Emma read through months of carefully documented observations, dates, events, contradictions between Trevor's claims and verifiable facts. Nothing secret, nothing obtained improperly. Just truth, organized and preserved. This is detailed, she said finally. You've been tracking this for months. I've been documenting reality. There's a difference between investigation and preservation. I wasn't trying to build a case against Trevor, I was just refusing to let his version of events be the only version that existed. But you never did anything with it. Because it wasn't my truth to act on. It was context for understanding, not ammunition for attack. The people who had the standing to challenge Trevor, Rachel, Linda, Natalie, they took their own actions when the circumstances made it possible. I just made sure that if anyone ever asked what actually happened, there would be a record beyond Trevor's self-serving narrative. Emma scrolled through the timeline, seeing her own career reflected in details she'd mentioned casually over months. So when he humiliated you at the party, you didn't respond because responding would have made it personal drama. But his behavior wasn't about me. It was about who he fundamentally was. Someone who used power to diminish others, who took credit for work he didn't do, who believed charm could substitute for character. David paused. Men like that don't need to be fought. They need to be documented and then allowed to collapse under the weight of their own corruption. The following weeks brought continued revelations. The company hired an external investigator who uncovered even more: falsified client testimonials, pressure on junior employees to inflate Trevor's contribution records, a pattern of targeting young women for inappropriate attention. Each discovery validated the experiences of people who'd been dismissed or ignored when they tried to raise concerns individually. Rachel's promotion was formalized with a public acknowledgement of her contributions and a commitment to better attribution systems. Natalie received a formal apology and was offered an extension of her internship under a different supervisor. Linda from accounting was recognized for her diligent documentation and professional courage. The company implemented new oversight protocols, anonymous reporting systems, and mandatory ethics training. They couldn't undo the years of dysfunction, but they could build structures to prevent its recurrence. Trevor himself disappeared from the industry. Criminal charges were filed for the expense fraud. Civil suits from the company sought repayment. His reputation, built on stolen credit and manufactured success, dissolved completely once the truth was established. The network he'd cultivated abandoned him once the cost of association became clear. Emma watched it unfold with mixed feelings. "Part of me feels vindicated," she admitted to David. "But part of me is angry that it took this long, that so many people suffered before anyone acted." "Systems protect power until the cost of protection exceeds the benefit," David said. "That's not cynicism, it's just organizational reality. The key is documenting truth so that when the moment comes, when people are finally ready to see, the evidence exists to support clarity instead of confusion." "You sound like you've thought about this a lot." "I used to work in investigative research. You learn that truth without evidence is just opinion, and evidence without organization is just noise. But truth, properly documented and patiently preserved, eventually finds its weight." 6 months after Trevor's departure, Cornerstone Media had settled into a new equilibrium. Rachel's leadership of the sales division had proven both effective and ethical. Her numbers were strong, but equally important, her team trusted her. The culture was shifting, slowly, toward accountability and genuine collaboration. Emma had been offered a promotion to Director of Strategic Development, recognition that had nothing to do with anyone else's downfall and everything to do with her own consistent excellence. She accepted, though with typical pragmatism, it's still the same company with some of the same problems. But at least now there's evidence that speaking up can lead to change instead of just career damage. David attended the celebration dinner Cornerstone hosted for promoted employees. It was different from the party 6 months earlier, smaller, more genuine, focused on actual achievements rather than performative camaraderie. Several of Emma's colleagues approached David, including Rachel. "I heard you kept documentation," Rachel said quietly. "A timeline of events." Emma mentioned it helped her maintain perspective during the investigation. "I documented what was public and what my wife shared," David confirmed. "Nothing secret or improper. Just organized truth." "Why? You weren't directly affected by most of it." David considered the question. "Because I was affected by the party incident, and that moment made me realize Trevor's behavior toward me was just one data point in a larger pattern. I couldn't address the pattern myself, I wasn't part of the system where it mattered. But I could make sure that if people inside that system ever gained the courage or opportunity to act, they wouldn't be fighting against manufactured narratives. The truth would exist, documented and clear." Rachel nodded slowly. Linda in accounting did the same thing with expense records. Natalie kept emails and messages. We all preserved pieces of truth independently, and when the audit created an opening, those pieces came together into an undeniable picture. "That's how systemic change usually works," David said. "Not through individual heroics but through distributed documentation and patient preservation. When enough people refuse to let lies become the default narrative, eventually the truth becomes too heavy to ignore." Later, as David and Emma walked to their car, she asked him something that had been on her mind. "At the party, when Trevor mocked you, what were you actually feeling? You seemed so calm, but that had to hurt." David was quiet for a moment, remembering. "I felt embarrassed, angry, diminished. All the things he intended me to feel. But I also felt something else, clarity. Because his choice to publicly humiliate someone who'd done nothing to him revealed his character completely. And I realized that responding emotionally would just make it about a personal conflict, two men with competing egos. But staying quiet and observing turned it into something else, a moment where Trevor showed everyone exactly who he was, and I showed exactly who I was. Which is someone who doesn't need to win every immediate battle because I understand that character wins long games. Trevor's character was hollow, all performance and theft and manipulation. Eventually that collapses. It has to, because it's built on nothing sustainable. My character is just being consistent about values and truth. That's boring and slow, but it's durable." Emma smiled. "You're very philosophical about someone who tried to humiliate you in front of my entire department. I'm philosophical about someone who destroyed himself while trying to make me feel small. His intent failed. My dignity remained intact. His career and reputation are gone. That's not revenge. I didn't cause his downfall. I just refused to let his version of reality be the only version that existed, and eventually reality reasserted itself. They drove in comfortable silence for a while before Emma spoke again. You know what the weirdest part is? I think Trevor still doesn't understand what happened. From his perspective, he was just doing what successful people do, taking credit, maximizing opportunities, using charm to navigate around rules. He probably thinks he got unlucky, that the audit was bad timing, that people betrayed him. That's the thing about people who lack genuine character, David said. They can't distinguish between bad luck and consequences. They see their downfall as something that happened to them, not something that emerged from their own choices. Trevor will probably tell himself a story where he's the victim of corporate politics and jealous colleagues. He'll never accept that he built his own cage through years of small corruptions that accumulated into something undeniable. Does that bother you? That he won't learn anything? No. My goal was never to teach Trevor a lesson or change who he is. My goal was just to maintain truth and support the people, like you, like Rachel, like Natalie, who were affected by his behavior. Trevor's self-awareness or lack of it is irrelevant to me. What matters is that his ability to harm others has been removed. Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. Thank you. For being calm when I needed calm, for documenting truth when everyone else was accepting lies, for understanding that fighting him directly would have just created more drama and damage. You don't need to thank me for being consistent with my values. That's just who I am. But later that night, alone in his office, David allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He opened his timeline document one final time, scrolling through months of careful documentation. Every entry was accurate, verifiable, important. This record had never been weaponized or weaponizable. It was simply truth, preserved against erosion and revision. He created a backup, encrypted it, and filed it away. Not for future use. The situation was resolved. But as a reminder to himself about the power of patient documentation, about the importance of refusing to let charisma obscure character, about the value of staying quiet when noise would only create confusion. The toast that Trevor had made 6 months ago echoed in David's memory. Here's to the men who pay the bills while their wives play career woman. Trevor had meant it as mockery, as diminishment, as a way to establish social dominance through humiliation. But he'd revealed more about himself than about David, revealed his need to put others down, his insecurity about power and status, his fundamental lack of character. David had responded not with anger or confrontation but with dignity and documentation. And in the end, dignity and truth had proven more durable than charm and deception. He closed the laptop and went to join Emma, who was already in bed reading. She looked up and smiled, and he was reminded that the people who matter, the people whose respect and love actually count, had never been confused about his worth. Trevor's opinion had been irrelevant from the beginning. David had just needed the patience to let reality demonstrate that truth. Come to bed, Emma said. Tomorrow's a big day, first day as Director of Strategic Development. I'm proud of you, David said, meaning it completely. I'm proud of us, Emma replied. Of what we built together while Trevor was building his house of cards. Ours is still standing. His never really existed at all. David turned off the light, and they settled into comfortable silence. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime rhythms. Thousands of stories, thousands of conflicts, thousands of quiet resolutions that would never make headlines but that mattered infinitely to the people living them. This was one of those stories. A story about patience over reaction, documentation over confrontation, character over charisma. A story about how sometimes the strongest response to disrespect is simply refusing to participate in the performance, maintaining truth, and allowing consequences to emerge naturally from corrupted foundations. Trevor had raised his glass to mock the men who pay the bills. David had raised nothing, said little, and documented everything. And in the end, that quiet consistency had proven more powerful than any dramatic confrontation could have been. The story ended not with revenge but with resolution, with truth acknowledged, with harmful patterns disrupted, with dignity intact. Sometimes that's the most satisfying ending of all.
Okay, if you value self respect and real stories like this, hit subscribe, You're not alone and you are not wrong for expecting better. Thank you for watching. Keep sporting. Thank you.